Hi everyone, I'm Zarif Tajwar Kareem, and this is a lecture on economy and material life. Now let's start talking about what falls under the umbrella of economy. But we're not going to be talking about supply and demand curves. Here we'll be talking about the economy as a social institution concerned with systems of production, distribution, and consumption of resources. Economics is obviously a social science that is dedicated to the study of the economy. To put it in another way, economics is the study of how and why people choose to utilize their resources. The way they do much of the field of economics, though, is closely focused on quantifying Western market economics and particularly focused on the Western economies. And it doesn't apply very well to the sorts of non-Western economies that anthropologists typically encounter in the field, right? Or what we have studied that anthropologists, since they go to native places or go to faraway places that are not a part of their culture, it does not encompass that. Now, we can see that in this particular topic, we can say that anthropology has taken a lot of inspiration from the study of economics itself. The same is true in the other direction. Anthropologists have provided economists with insights into how economic principles work in other cultures. The basic idea of economics is that resources are scarce, that there isn't enough of them to satisfy everyone's wants in a society. Therefore, there has to be some method of determining how to use these limited resources. Economics is about decision making, and how those decisions are made varies from one culture to another. And uh, an economy has three phases of production. When resources are in their natural state, and then they are transformed into products for distribution. When those products are moved to where and who will use them and consume them, when those products are used for some purpose, which may or may not be the intended purpose of that particular product or whatever that item is. We'll look at each phase of this economic activity and try to understand the processes that go along with production in trying to acquire these natural resources. Then we turn it into a product, and then we give it to a conglomerate to distribute, and then a person buys it to consume. There's different aspects, and they're transforming based on the different regions that it's happening in, so the different cultures that it is taking part in. Right. So it's going to be something different from, for example, here in Bangladesh. You can see the garments, the RMG sector particularly, where you can see that make the cloth itself, then we dye it, and then we make the clothes itself, then we export the clothes outwards, and it's being sold to a foreign market. Most of the clothes that we make in Bangladesh are not even being sold here. So these are things we need to understand before taking a step into how we look at it really from an anthropological perspective. So, you know, so taking that into consideration, we uh, we must look at the ways that the means of production, or the ways of harnessing and transforming these resources, include land on which the resources can be found, labor through which they can be acquired, and technology or capital tools that are valuable because they can help us make new things out of these resources that are even equally as valuable or even more valuable. you know the means of production are indeed scarce also, just like natural resources, so we must make decisions about how to use them. An example of that is how a culture creates a subsistence strategy, affects its use of one of the most important means of production, land. Every culture has rules for how land is going to be used, and one of the and it has a direct impact on how food is being supplied or what kind of food production is happening in that particular region. Bangladesh, for example, is an agricultural based society. So we focus our land in trying to make food. And even then, we are largely exporters of many of the products, food products that are being created here. You know, uh, land allocation rules can also be tied to the kind of society that it's a part of. So, for example, land allocation rules, are closely tied to subsistence in hunting and gathering societies. The individual seldom owns exclusive access to particular territories, So this is because the land itself isn't particularly valuable or scarce. Hunter-gatherers are nomadic, right? And they have low populations. They can always find more land. What they have a limited supply of, however, is food, and the food moves around the landscape as herds migrate or certain plants come into season. So individual hunter-gatherers don't own land because they must move to different territories. As the food with the system of land ownership, they might not have access to new territory because someone else already owns it. You can see how a hunter-gatherer society is so different from a agrarian society, which I gave the example of Bangladesh, and how this is what we look at, that the way in which different cultures or different political or societal systems can affect the way that the economy itself is working, right? So we need to be looking at that here through an anthropological lens. Um, There's another thing we need to consider when it comes to hunter-gatherers, that is that there's a kind of communal ownership of large territories. For example, the Bushmen in the Kalahara that you read about in the Richard Lee article, they have an expanse of land that is covered. They move within that space. They're nomadic within that given region. But that territory is being restricted because of the rival other hunter-gatherer tribes that exist within the neighboring territories. And these territories are designated based enough and is kind of created and understood to be large enough so that it can have adequate food supplies. They can have adequate herds, or certain plants are being grown all over different regions at different times of the year, so it's enough to sustain the hunter-gatherer life. It's a large territory where people are moving their locations throughout, and everyone who belongs to the culture, this kind of culture, has equal access to the resources that is available in that territory. Now, outsiders may be prohibited from gathering food within the communal territory. Like I said, there's tribal communities which might have conflicts, or they might have alliances which might allow them to have access to that particular territory, right? But like in most cases, I think if you in most hunter-gatherer societies, if a particular rule is being followed, or a particular cultural trait is being followed, to ask for permission to go upon the land to hunt for food, then those resources are being accessed by outsiders, or allowed to be accessed by outsiders. You know, most of hunter-gatherers in the Arctic, Africa, South America, rural Australia, all owned land in this way, at least until the modern governments force them to give up their territories. The situation is quite different amongst the pastoralists, but is also very similar. Pastoralists have a different kind of life, as we have read uh, in the previous classes, but we can try to understand how the economies can be very similar here. Individuals typically do not own land, just like hunter-gatherers, but the community as the whole does. The big difference that is the food production, right? pastoralists typically do own livestock, and they privately own livestock that are is a both product and a means of production, since sometimes they're the end goal, as in it is the dinner that you're going to be putting on the table. And sometimes they're just a source of secondary products like wool, milk, um, or storage. Even certain places in are used in certain pastoral societies. Individuals can even invest in labor, in investing in their personal herds to increase the size and wealth, uh, which is not possible in hunter-gatherer societies. No one person invests so much in labor, in the creation of wild food resources in a hunter-gatherer society. Like the pastoralists do this, but the hunter-gatherers don't. So everyone has equal access to those foods, but in pastoralism, individuals do invest significant amount in the amounts of labor that is the individual animals itself. So they have a basic control over the disposition of those resources, whether they want to slaughter them, breed them, continue to own the land and property in this way, where they they gather the herd together. But obviously, pastoralists are also nomadic in nature, you know, and is very different from horticulturists, where the system of land ownership is more or less a mixture of both the hunter-gatherer and the pastoral patterns. Horticulturalists shift from garden plot to garden plot. Frequently, particular locations on the landscape have little value and in of themselves. The group still owns territory communally, just like in hunter-gatherers and pastoral, but individuals or families own particular plots permanently. However, during a period when a particular plot is in production, a single family has invested much time and labor in clearing, planting, and tending to that plot. So, uh, like pastoralists, like with their herds, the family has control over the plot. Others must acquire permission before using the plot or whatever is being produced on that plot. However, this is more of a kind of a lease, rather than an ownership, since one plot becomes a productive and your family no longer gardens there, right? The horticulturalist family would no longer plant there because it would not thrive. The plants would not be produced, and the land reverts to a communal ownership yet again. Now let's talk about agricultural societies, the one that we, at least the Bangladeshis here, would be living in, you know? And many of the countries also, agricultural societies generally have a system of full-blown land ownership, where an individual or family has exclusive ownership of the land, more or less permanently, since in an agricultural society, the particular plot will remain productive more or less permanently. Ownership is more or less permanent as well. This is the system we have in our own society. Now, this example shows how economic questions about the use of land are integrated with the subsistence strategy of a community. So we can see how the different kinds of systems that exist all over the world have kind of guided the way in how the food production happens, and hence guided the way that production is actually taking place. You understand? Now, similar decisions that we've been talking about so far have to be made in the agricultural system also. And those systems are going to be integrated with the rest of the culture. But even when they're allocated those means of productions, there still exists an underdeveloped state. Even with hunting and gathering society, someone must gather the food and cook it, right? And in most human cultures throughout history, that is the kind of norm. The second most important means of production has been human labor. People either individually or in groups, use their own muscle power to produce goods. Simple technologies assist them, but energy and determination kind of is needed to transform the resource that came ultimately from their own hard work, or from the hard work of the beasts that they are having in use, just like in the pastoralist ones, right? It's only in the past couple of centuries that we have mechanized production, using machines and non-human sources of power like fossil fuels have become an important source of energy. This kind of technology is most often referred to as capital. Anthropologists now are less interested in how production takes place and more so in how it's organized. How we organize the mode of productions in a particular society. How that is relating to how the culture is dictating the production. Organizing the ways in which we go about production. Now, there are many modes of production, but some are more common than others. When they first were documented by Western groups, most cultures were typified by the domestic mode of production, where members of individual households pool their labor to produce goods that will be consumed by the household itself. As a general rule, we can see that human beings, around the world are lazy. They only work as much as is necessary, really. And in a domestic mode of production, as much as necessary is what's needed for the survival and relative comfort of the household. Thus, foragers, gatherers are are going day to day, and they will survive based on the food they have gathered or hunted on that day. So it's a level of sustenance is different. You understand, and it's based on the culture that they are a part of. Hunter gatherers would probably then just hunt and forage in the morning and then laze around there most of the day, visit relatives. Farmers, though, they grow as many crops as they'll eat in the next year, enough to have sustenance for the next season of crops, to have enough seeds to grow again, and they will keep sustaining themselves in that loop. Now, the domestic motor production generally does not produce a surplus, and everyone in the society lives more or less in the same lifestyle in the last few centuries, at least in the West. And since Western contact in other parts of the world have gotten to other parts of the world, most cultures have shifted from the domestic to the industrial mode of production. Much of the work is now transforming raw materials into usable goods, depends on expensive machinery. This is the capital. They are in itself expensive, and they are being owned by capitalists. And since they're owning these particular means of productions, they have a lot to say about what and how a particular culture is being oriented. So, as we can see now in the society we live in, that in a modern society that we live in now, that most people are wage earners. They trade their labor and operate machines or provide services where they exchange that for monetary value, right? You're working to get money. And then they exchange that again for the goods they themselves created. They originally helped produce that. Using the capital that the capitalist owned, they created this product. Then just gaining money in order to do that process, providing the labor to create that product, right? And then you go out in the world, you go to a shop and you're like, oh, I made that. Or I created that marketing campaign, which is now inflicting upon maybe my family. And now they're buying that product too. So It's money going in, money going out, and there is a clear incentive in this particular society, in the capitalist mode of production, to work harder, make more wages, which then again can be converted into any sort of good. One produces domestic production, sorry, one ways of domestic production do not produce more than they need. Domestic producers do not make more than they need. And uh, more labor might produce a surplus in a capitalist mode of system of, say, something like shoes, but there's nothing to do with that. But if there's a surplus in an agricultural society, that means that there'll be more food available to not only the family, but maybe to the surrounding people, your neighbors around that location, where you will be able to sell that surplus maybe for a profit and create a gain. And that is a different system itself. However, in a capitalist mode where there's a surplus of shoes and your family already has shoes, everybody else has shoes because that is the norm, that is the cultural norm, and that is the comfortable way of surviving and living and walking around in society today. But we go out of our way to purchase certain kinds of limited edition Nikes or something like that. Why is that? Because this surplus has created an idea that we can brand or add value to this particular surplus of products by marketing or creating a narrative about this product in a certain way and pitching it to the public. Right. That is what marketing is. It pitches a product to you, and then you try to understand whether you need it or not. And sometimes people are susceptible to those things. Now, there are many things that I just spoke about, but the end goal of the production process is a set of goods and commodities that meet the needs of the community. That is the main goal. Now, the surplus can be used whatever way possible, and capitalists use it to create even more profit for themselves, like I said, by branding it, marketing it in different ways. But we can see that in this current world, in the modern world, we can see how different economies have allocated the means of production, most particularly land, and how the relationships are organized by the modes of production. The cultural relationships are based on that. But we still haven't looked at what is probably the most important question. What should we be producing in the first place? Now, Eric Wolf, an economic anthropologist, divides the products of an economic system into 5 different funds based on what sorts of needs they satisfy. Every economy must produce things that meet several different kinds of needs. The sustenance fund meets the nutritional needs of a community and is essential for any component of any economy. You know, so a sustenance strategy then would be kind of a universal cultural norm. The replacement fund includes products that replace or maintain the technology, the kinds of means of production we were talking about, the capital that you need to even create any kinds of goods. It is also essential because then to sustain yourself, you would need to have the necessary tools to create that product, whether it be food or anything else, shelter, and so on. The social fund meets the needs of maintaining and building social relationships, certain things like gifts, for example, certain ceremonial, uh, creating like gifts that you will provide in a wedding, for example, plates, which you will also need domestically, right? The necessary household items you'll need, a table, a chair, everything else. These are parts of things that you would need. Now, another fund that Wolf talks about is the ceremonial fund, which consists of those products that are used in ceremonies and rituals, right? So, for example, in a Muslim majority state like Bangladesh, it would be the production of China majis, projection to the production of prayer beads, which you use to count prayers, right? Things like that, and these are some of the things that are kind of consistent, but they are created in different ways throughout the different cultures, right? Because not every culture is the same, again, and not every culture has the same kind of identity or attaches itself to a same kind of political, let's call it religious, ethnic, whatsoever, right? So they will vary greatly. The way I said universal before may be misconstrued, but I mean that these kinds of funds, as Eric Wolf says, exist in these societies, but they're not the same kinds of funds, you know? So we must look at these particular strategies that are in play and the funds that exist in these societies in order to navigate how the particular economy in that location is actually narrating or creating a particular kind of pathway for that culture to take or for that country to take, you know? Finally, let's talk about how there's certain goods that are being produced, for the support of, in the need of support for political superiors. Uh, it exists, this idea exists only in economies of societies that have uh, political superiors. And so egalitarian economies lack this. Having produced the goods just as the society needs or wants doesn't work. And what I mean here by political superiors is that there's a political hierarchy in which a bureaucracy exists. And so trickling down, it changes and also creates an idea of certain goods that is needed to be made based on the decisions that the polity makes, that the government makes, right? And um, not everyone can always produce everything we need, right? And certain decisions are being made by those people that do have power. But we also need to look at how the relations work with each other in the world right now. It's not only that the political people that are making the decisions itself, but needed to consider globalization and the relationships that we have with other countries or that your country has with other countries and the exchange of goods that's happening between them. And then we can understand how the economy can dictate the ways in which people are living their lives, you know? The three basic modes of production, modes of exchange are uh, reciprocity, redistribution, and market reciprocity. You know, and it takes place between equals and is often considered something like a gift exchange, right? Like a barter system. And a gift is given to one participant by another, but a return gift is sometimes not necessary here. And this is sometimes the kind of deals we make. If you look at the policies that we have in place or the particular treaties or international summits that we go to where we sign on particular, for example, the climate change summit where we decided to lower emissions and so on and so forth. We gave a promise to do this, and we didn't want anything in return in that regard. And many of the countries decided to do that, and many didn't. You know, and the goal is to be kind of generous and altruistic when it comes to something like this, and the return gift is kind of delayed rather than not received. It's something like if I scratch your back, you'll scratch my back, that kind of situation. Now, balanced reciprocity takes place, and it usually takes place with people that are not allies, that are not like common friends or common associations when it comes to countries, right? That's when you want to have a give and take situation because you wouldn't trust each other in that manner. Because you have a relationship that's already built, for example, Bangladesh with India, this gift giving, this reciprocity process would exist. But with someone like, I don't know, some other country like Australia, where probably we don't have the best of relationships. I'm not sure actually, but maybe we don't have that kind of relationship with them where we can give them a gift and we can hope to receive something back later. We need to do an equal exchange. And through this manner, a lot of ways now, the global economy has created a basis of debt where countries are reliant on other countries in order to exist and proceed themselves. We see that very commonly with the debt that is happening in America. Even though they maintain a kind of idea and lifestyle, um, it is uh, what how the world is right now, right? The most of the production of goods happen in China and is then being exported to other countries like our own and first world countries, where they are making a huge profit and are gaining monetary power, which is a lot in a capitalist world. Now, most of what we talked about is is about how an economy in particular can work and how these economic strategies or economic systems that are in play can affect a society. And this is what we try to learn here. You see the Richard Lee article, right? You can see how we are trying to understand how Christmas went about in the Kalahari, right? And how Richard Lee himself, it took him so long to realize what was happening because he didn't understand the particular cultural nuances of him being an outsider and not asking the right question. So I leave you with this. When you are studying within anthropology, be sure that you are asking the right question. That's the end of the lecture. Thank you so much.